Hello and welcome to Maiden, Mother, Matriarch with me, Louise Perry. My guest today is Freya India, writer, particularly of the amazing Substack GIRLS, where Freya writes about issues affecting girls and young women. We spoke about a whole host of those today, and particularly how the lives of young women are so enmeshed with online culture. So we spoke about the glamorisation of antidepressants, of therapy culture, the bizarre plastic surgery trends that have been triggered by social media, the ways in which young women are simultaneously made miserable by the internet and then sold supposedly the solutions to their misery again by the internet, and various, perverse phenomena. Why is buccal fat removal suddenly so fashionable? Why is Kim Kardashian followed by so many millions of young women and girls? The extended version of the episode can be found at louiseperry.substack.com, where, as ever, you can also find the bonus episodes I do fortnightly with my husband, the back catalogue of all of our extended episodes, and the MMM chat community. Enjoy. Before we start the episode, I want to briefly tell you about two things. Firstly, we'll be hosting a second Maiden Mother matchmaking event on the evening of February 19th at James Ciavarini's justly famous Il Palombe restaurant in central London. Everyone there will be there because they are looking to find a spouse. If you're interested in applying for a ticket, then head over to louiseperry.substack.com or follow the link in the show notes for more details. Secondly, many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world is a theme I return to again and again on the podcast. My view is that we can't really understand ourselves or understand the world around us without getting to grips with it, which is why I'm very glad to put you towards a new online course called 321. It's an introduction to Christianity that's imaginative, thoughtful, engaging. It assumes absolutely no prior knowledge. It's presented by the wonderful Glenn Scrivener, who has been a guest on the MMM podcast previously, and I've also been a guest on his show. Glenn presents 8 video-led sessions, which are based around some beautiful animated stories that illustrate the Christian message. You can check it out for free at 321course.com/MMM. Just enter your email, choose a password, and you're in. There's no spam, there's no fees. Just visit 321course.com/MMM. Freya, you have introduced me to a term that I was not aware of, but you've done the hard work so that listeners don't have to, and delved into TikTok and Instagram and all the worst parts of social media, and come back with the phrase "hot girl pills."
Yes.
What are hot girl pills for the boys and girls listening at home?
There's hot girl pills. There's also silly girl pills as well. Hot girl pills are basically a way to describe your antidepressants or your mental health medication. If you go on TikTok, #medication, you will see not only girls calling them hot girl pills and silly girl pills, but putting their SSRIs in like sweets dispensers, making advent calendars of their different mental health medication.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It is funny.
Yeah, it's become such kind of a core part of people's identity. And I do get it to an extent, because I get if you're struggling with your mental health, to trivialize it and make it lighthearted might help. But when you go on and you see these posts are getting millions of views, and we know that like a third of TikTok users are under 14. So they're seeing medication glamorized.
I didn't know it was that high. Yeah. Yes. And I mean, because it's not just having a bit of fun by putting your pills in an advent calendar. It's then photographing or videoing that and putting it on social media, which is a completely different thing to do, because you are. Yeah, I mean, it feels like I know you wrote a fab essay on your Substack recently about this phenomenon of normalizing young women using antidepressants, but normalizing is the wrong word, because we're so beyond that at this point. The idea that we're destigmatizing this just seems mad to me, because since when is this stigmatized, at least among this generation?
Yeah, I think actually we've normalized drugs and diagnosis so much that we've stigmatized being a normal human, having normal adolescent girl emotions. And a lot of it is done under the guise of kind of mental health awareness. So a lot of these posts by the girls themselves, but also if you look at, say, mental health influencers, like there's a trend called #postyourpill, which the doctor from Love Island started. I don't know if you know him, but he basically posted a picture of his mental health medication, sticking his tongue out with the pill on his tongue, and got loads of people, millions of people, to do the same, which was for mental health awareness. But you go on the hashtag and it just looks like complete glamorization of it, normalization of it, and people saying things like, my pill helps me become confident, it helps me be like a badass. And if you're 14 and you're scrolling through that, you're going to think, then I need to have that medication, or I want to jump on the trend. So I think it's really worrying for young girls, especially who are, seeking attention online. That's a great way to get it. And, these are serious medications. They're nothing trivial.
I mean, the funny thing is, right, who would put the whole claim is that this is stigmatized and look at me being brave, but like, who would put a photo of themselves like taking their anti-diarrhea medication or something like that on social media? Like, there'd be a lot less clout available. Clearly what's actually going on is that there is something glamorous and desirable about mental illness. Probably not really full blown. I mean, there's that quite famous essay from years ago now from who's that Guardian writer, Hannah? Oh, I can't remember her name. It'll come to me once I stop thinking about it. But she wrote this really good essay many years ago about the fact that she has mental illness, but not the Instagram kind.
Yes,
she has like psychosis
Yeah.
and mania that leaves her like having sex with terrible people and spending all her money, and like actually the kind of mental illness that completely destroys her life.
Yeah, this is not that. This is not what girls want. Yeah.
The perfect spot is I guess relatively mild depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
And maybe a mild eating disorder.
Yeah, there's like a line where I was looking recently at therapy companies, how they advertise to young girls, because it's predominantly girls and young women that they're kind of targeting clearly through the advertising. And there was one ad where they paid an influencer to say, do you have big girl depression or sad girl summer or something? Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, so we're not talking about mental illness then, we're talking about sadness. But I think girls and young women have always been drawn to like the glamorizing of something dark and depressing. I remember that when I was younger, like kind of goth and emo stages. Now I feel like it's become mental illness, but the problem with that is it can lead you on a conveyor belt to medication, which has insane side effects and risks. So it's not a trivial thing for young people to be glamorizing.
I think as well, the other downside of being drawn to medication, aside from the side effects, which I do want to talk about because those are important, is it doesn't actually solve your problems, because most antidepressant medication doesn't do very much. Like, it's fairly similar to placebo. And what's very likely to be going on is actually, it's not that you have a biochemical imbalance, which is, I mean, it's kind of the jury's out on whether that's true in some cases, but in very many cases, it's not that you're talking about a biochemical imbalance, it's that you're talking about something bad in your life, which it might not be possible to solve it. It might be out of your control, but it also might be. It might be like you're using screens too much, or like you have a horrible boyfriend, or like any number of things which you could solve, but taking a pill is definitely not going to solve.
And that's why it's not stigma, because the chemical imbalance theory of mental health has never been definitively proven. And like you said, there's little difference between SSRIs and placebo for treating depression. So it's kind of insane that you go on TikTok and these girls are utterly convinced it's a chemical imbalance. There's girls on there saying things like, sometimes I think about if I could have a normal life, I'll be like this forever. It's very kind of fatalistic, this is how I'm wired. And I don't understand how that has translated from such, ongoing debates about the research. So to call it stigma is just insane. It's the absolute opposite.
It's clearly in the interest of a lot of pharmaceutical companies to push this narrative.
Yeah.
In terms of actual doctors and other mental health professionals, at least people I've spoken to tend to have a more nuanced and sensible position on this. And actually, what I've heard from one clinical psychologist friend is that it's often patients actually who are desperate for the drugs. And it's doctors who will kind of reluctantly give them to them and say, look, it's more complex, etc., etc. But I mean, one, it's because of exactly what you're talking about, the glamorization, the fact that it's a product being pushed. But also, I think that people who are sad, the idea that you could just have a pill,
It's very comforting.
and
Yeah.
it's so comforting, because imagine being able to solve your problem so swiftly and put it in a little, candy dispenser.
Imagine
like
being able to fix like the stress of being an adolescent girl. I mean, it's horrible. I would have loved a pill to take.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at Reddit, there's all of these kind of preteen, teen girls, and guys as well, but mostly girls and young women, talking about like telling each other scripts of how you can get medication. So if you want to get onto an antidepressant, these are the words you need to say to your doctor. This is what you need to say, the symptoms you've had. So yeah, it's a real push from patients to want to get medication. And I think that's because they've been convinced that to see all of their problems in a medical sense, and, like you said, you might have a bad boyfriend, or your parents are splitting up, and the negative emotion you feel, you think, oh, that's because I have a chemical imbalance. I haven't paid enough for someone to heal me, which is really bad for kids' resilience, because if you think you can't get through life without taking a pill or having some kind of intervention, then you're going to think like that forever. You kind of have to face these things head on. But unfortunately, there's so much profit in pushing it on young people.
I've always thought that the interventions for depression and anxiety that actually seem to work, aside from leaving a bad boyfriend, your parents getting back together, whatever it is, are things like exercise, things like spending time with loved ones, being outside, all this kind of stuff. And it always occurs to me that those are basically the components of a very traditional lifestyle.
Yeah.
Even things like sitting around a campfire with, there's actually some evidence that that's, makes an appreciable difference to your feeling of well-being. None of this is to say that it's really great being a hunter-gatherer. It's clearly very tough being a hunter-gatherer or a peasant or whatever. There are lots and lots of downsides to living subsistence lifestyle. But there does seem to be something maladaptive about our current, very safe, very affluent environment that makes people distressed.
Yeah, and those things that you mentioned are all things that don't have to be sold to you as a product or a service. You can find them for free. Like a meaningful relationship is something you can find outside of the market. Exercise you can do without paying. And so I think that's not coming across to young people, because they're getting bombarded with targeted ads that are all, pay for this, download this app, you need this procedure to feel good about yourself. And I really think we've lost that kind of simple fixes to things, because we think that they're patronizing. So if a girl is sad, we think it's patronizing to say, go out in the sunshine and go for a walk, because people will be like, well, that's not going to solve my problem. But the kind of age-old advice is true, but we're just failing to translate it to young people.
Have you read Isabel Hardman's book, The Natural Health Service?
No, I haven't.
It's really nice. I'd recommend it to everyone listening. She writes about politics for The Spectator, but she also writes a bit about mental health and has written this book about it, because she has serious, not mild depression, anxiety. She's had very serious PTSD, which led to her having to leave work for a long period. And she did have all the standard medical interventions, the drugs, the talking therapies and whatever. But the stuff that she found that actually improved her health the most was the stuff we're talking about, the kind of the trad stuff, like bird watching, running, gardening,
Yeah,
like all
it's so
sorts of
simple.
yeah. I have a friend who always says, like, if you want to work out what the best lifestyle is for like maximizing your well-being, look at what rich retired people do.
Yeah, that's true.
People with like maximum years of like wisdom from being alive, but also like maximum time and
Yeah, I was
resources.
going to say that's like my nan and granddad's lifestyle.
Yeah,
They should.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and all those things are really proven. Like
Mm.
it's a great book, The Natural Health Service, because these things really are proven to be beneficial. And I started doing cold water swimming because I read that book, and it's incredible. It's like a free high that you get that's actually good for you, and it's not necessarily free in the sense that like you have to go to a Lido or get an ice bath or whatever. Like it's slightly annoying to do. It's more annoying than like going for a walk, but it really, really works. Like you honestly boost your mood so much. And I've read data suggesting that it is much more effective for depression and anxiety, cold water exposure, than is any medication that we know of.
Really? Oh, I can believe that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
the other thing as well, there's all the natural remedies, but the other thing is helping other people, and you know there's so many studies that show that we get this kind of long-term fulfillment from helping others and focusing on other people. Yet the narrative now about mental health is focused more and more on yourself. Do the work, go inwards, like kind of analyze your whole,
ruminate.
ruminate. That is the
Yeah,
advice, and it's the worst advice because I've heard Jordan Peterson describe it as like there's actually no difference between being mentally ill and obsessing over yourself. Like it's the same thing. The more you think about yourself and your worries and your fears, the more you're gonna. I would say not for people who are severely mentally ill, but for kids that are anxious and stressed, a lot of the time they could benefit from getting out of their own heads, and things like ice baths, nature walks is all part of that. It's just like you're not relentlessly thinking about yourself.
a standard line that you'll sometimes hear against the medications is to say all the things that we've said already about why taking drugs is, won't solve your problems. There are all these side effects, etc. The better alternative that's presented is therapy.
Yeah.
And I am quite skeptical about
So am I.
therapy.
So am I.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You've written about this. What do you think are the downsides of that kind of the therapy culture that's also being pushed?
Well, I used to think like big pharma was like the thing that I thought this is terrible. To present this as the solution to all mental health problems is really bad. But then I started to think, well, there's this whole kind of big therapy industry that's developing, especially virtual therapy companies. So
Yeah,
the companies like BetterHelp, Talkspace,
yeah.
they are just bombarding young people with ads.
They sponsor every other
Oh
podcast,
my
as far
God.
as I can
Well,
tell.
because
Yeah.
I did it, because I wrote that Substack, now my computer is giving me ads all the time for BetterHelp. I'm like,
Mm,
please leave me alone. But
mm.
it's kind of really, really vague symptoms. Um, Saying things like, do you ever feel stressed or worried, or do you ever need some self-care? And what they're advertising is being able to message a therapist 24/7 from your room. Like that's literally the tagline of one of the companies, which to me is probably the absolute worst thing to give someone who's anxious, fragile, and risk averse, is to say you can text a therapist all day, every day.
It's also, I thought, was always considered by psychotherapists, like responsible ones, to be bad because you need to have boundaries. You shouldn't be always accessible to your clients. But it seems like it's encouraging, yeah, all access,
Yeah,
and also
because it's
it's
not,
like discounted rates and everything.
yeah, because it's not about the patient's well-being.
Mm.
Like these companies are using Silicon Valley tactics. They're using the same tactics as Facebook and Instagram because they want to keep you addicted to your screen and on the app and chatting to your therapist. So the incentives are just completely wrong. And I said in the piece, like, I do think there's a benefit to genuine therapy for people who, especially if you have no one else to turn to and you need kind of an objective opinion. I agree with that, but I think there's so many people in Gen Z who are just normally anxious, normally insecure, and are just spending ridiculous amount of hours on their screen. And then they're being told, okay, the solution is to sit in front of your screen and talk to a
More
stranger.
screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A stranger
Yeah.
who doesn't know you. And, you know, if you speak to your friends and family, you're putting a burden on them. You're putting like emotional labor onto them. So we've got that narrative as well.
I saw this really bleak ad for, I think it was BetterHelp or a similar sort of service recently on YouTube. And it was a young woman speaking to camera about how she benefited from it and saying that what she wanted was to sort of tailor make her own therapist. So she was a young Black American woman, and she was saying, you know, I really wanted a Black woman, you know, like a Black older woman. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
And I thought, what you want is a mum.
Oh God, that's so sad. I was gonna say a friend, but a mum is even.
No, because it's like an older woman that she specifically wanted, and or like an aunt or something, you know, who's you. That's what you're basically looking for, is like an older female relative. Except what you want is, I mean, maybe she doesn't have any available, right? Like, to be fair to her, but the other thing that the service offers her is optionality and absolutely no commitment. So if at any moment she's like displeased with this surrogate aunt figure,
Yeah.
she can just
Swap
hang
her
up,
out.
stop paying for the service. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's you know, was writing about how I think the demand for therapy is not because we're increasingly mentally ill. I think a lot of it is loneliness. So many young people are lonely, and if you look at the ads, that is what the companies are selling you. I mean, another one of the ads, there's a woman talking about she had like insomnia and depression, and she said she got a therapist, and she said being able to text someone about how I feel was life changing. And I'm like, life
You didn't have
changing?
anyone?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the fact that that is life changing, and
Yeah.
all of the ads are like, find someone to talk to. They even say things like a therapist who's like your bestie. And it's just like, this is terrible, because all the relationships young people are being encouraged to have are like these commodified relationships where people are paid to speak to them. And yeah, I think it's just insane that companies are allowed to use that loneliness against us and then leave us in a more lonely position, because the therapist is not going to care about you the same that your family or friends are going to care. So it's a really tragic cycle.
One of the other reasons I'm skeptical about therapy is that I think that because there are obviously some therapists who are very professional, very responsible, won't do this, but there is a financial incentive to keep people coming back, and one of the things, therefore, that therapists are incentivized to do is not to say anything that will displease a client.
Yeah, just affirm everything. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, so crucially, not to ever say, like, maybe you're the asshole.
Yeah,
right?
generally.
Because no one wants to hear that. Is it that Taylor Swift song? Is it Taylor Swift? And you listen to the live recording of it, and she has this like whole stadium full of young women saying, maybe I'm the problem.
Oh, yeah.
Remember? Yeah, it always makes me laugh, because like, who says that? It's such a rare sentiment. And it's particularly accompanied by this sort of online culture that we're discussing of like, and you know, this hyper individualist, hyper like self promoting culture, which really actually doesn't leave space for maybe I'm making mistakes, maybe I'm treating people badly. You know, it's all about I am the victim of whatever external circumstance, you know, has come my way, and the only thing I can do to solve it is to have mental health professionals
and
prescribe me things and soothe me.
The therapeutic kind of narrative now is like, it's almost like, how can I justify my bad behavior in a therapeutic way? And I think, you know, therapists then come and indulge that and affirm that. So, you know, and as well as, you know, feminism, there's a feminist narrative which is doing the same thing, which is kind of saying everything you do is empowering, no matter who it affects in your life, as long as it's, you know, your personal desires and autonomy. So young women have two narratives coming at them at the same time, saying whatever you do can be justified. But I think that ultimately does a disservice to young women, because you don't want to be told constantly by everyone that your behavior is acceptable, because you're just trash your life. And I think, especially for girls that are spending so much time online, that's all they're hearing is like, everything you do is justified, everything is okay. And I think girls need some of that discipline that men are craving as well. You know, we also need to be told, like, no, this behavior is not good. And I think there's a
Maybe
real
I'm
lack
the
of
problem.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Taylor's right.
She is. We're the problem.
This brings us on very nicely to the cheating thing. You wrote an essay recently about this trend, I suppose, for women cheating because it's feminist.
Yeah. So it was a statistic saying since 1990, the number of women admitting to affairs has risen by 40% or something.
Is this admitting to the people taking the survey, I guess, rather than to their partners?
Yeah, I think so. So I don't know how accurate that survey is, but it was the way a certain feminist wrote about that statistic, where she said basically that was women reclaiming their bodily autonomy, fighting back against patriarchal restrictions. And I think she called it a feminist act of self-care to cheat. And I just thought, well, that is the kind of inevitable endpoint of where we're heading. You know, if we're saying that everything you do, you know, for your own personal desires is good and empowering because it makes you feel good, then obviously we would end up at that point where cheating becomes feminist. But I also thought it was kind of an inevitable end result of consumer capitalism, really, where we're also growing up with this kind of bombardment of advertisements and this consumer culture that tells us that everything can be upgraded and replaced. And we're kind of scrolling through social media, treating each other like disposable products. And I think that's, again, two things coming together where we just see people as replaceable. And young women are being told, you know, that's in some way desirable to see people as disposable because you're like an empowered woman who does what she wants. And I think that's just, it's obviously like a niche example, but I mean, in the article, I was talking about some big mainstream magazines that were saying it. I think it was like Cosmo was saying tips for what to do after you cheat. Number one was like, don't tell him. And then Women's Health was saying why you shouldn't regret an affair. There's also that podcast, Call Her Daddy, which is like a feminist podcast. And they sell like cheat on him crop tops. So it's not a really obscure opinion. And
no,
so
also the Times you mentioned. There was a period where, like, every weekend I'd read in the Times something about how women cheating is fab, and I was like, who's this senior female editor at the Times who's having an affair and is like endlessly commissioning pieces to
yeah. So I just thought, well, that's just like a perfect example of where we're heading, and terrible for young women themselves, because again, it's like, where are the female figures in our culture saying no, this is unacceptable? And I think women need that. We also need the discipline.
Yeah, the justification given is all for the cheating thing is all along the lines of like, it'll make you feel better. It'll like, it's got absolutely nothing to do with either of the men involved.
Oh yeah, or children. Sometimes there's children.
Yeah.
Like, and they're still justifying it under the sense of, you know, if I'm happy, the children will be happy.
Oh yeah, if it gives mummy a spring in her step, then
exactly,
it's all worth it. I mean, it's actually incredibly dangerous advice, right? If anyone who like familiar with domestic violence statistics and the association between female infidelity or suspected infidelity and male violence is really high. I mean, it's absolutely not. It's not a safe thing to tell and to advise any woman who has a like unstable boyfriend to do. Obviously, she should leave the unstable boyfriend.
Yeah, but to call it an act of self-care,
it's just madness.
Absolute madness. Yeah.
Yeah, but as you say, it is the logical endpoint of this way of thinking, which is odd as well, isn't it? That simultaneously the line is toxic masculinity is extremely bad, but also you should aspire to behave like a toxically masculine man.
Yeah.
As a woman.
So why do you think that is? Because
I mean, I guess I think what they'd say is just it's different from when women do it, because it would be in a kind of oppressed hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it would be like how, you know, you can be as violent as you like if you're doing it in the name of decolonization, for
Yes.
instance.
Yeah.
They'd say women, pushing back by cheating, for instance, or being disagreeable.
So it's like a vengeance kind of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
and because women are like necessarily oppressed
Mm-hmm.
in all circumstances, that can never be,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it fits into all the other frameworks as well. Like, I don't know, if you're not white, you can't be racist or whatever. It's all kind of the
Yeah.
same dichotomy, just applied in different circumstances.
Yeah. Because I've been trying to think why that is, and the other thing I thought is like in as you talk about in this kind of modern dating market, the way to kind of get through it is to be, as like emotionally detached as possible for women, because like otherwise it's really anxiety inducing. So I think a lot of it's almost like a defense mechanism. Like, okay, I'm going to cheat on you first before you do it to me, or something like that.
I think also the reason these young women want to be like hyper masculine in their behavior is because they think, and I don't think they're wrong about this, that men are higher status than women, that there's status attached to being masculine, whereas being feminine, you might be lovable, you might be desirable, but you're not really high status. So I think that they have, I mean, and this I've said many times that this is, I think, what like patriarchy in the modern usage of the term actually means. It's not really about women being excluded from positions of power and authority. It's about masculinity still having a kind of status cachet that femininity doesn't. And these young women have spotted that, and so they kind of try and imitate men, except we know that it's a fairly futile and self-defeating thing to do.
Yeah, it's funny because there's almost two things happening at once, where women are putting on this, we're like encouraged to put on this kind of masculine front and be the empowered woman who's kind of emotionally detached and just doesn't feel anything. And at the same time, we have this therapy culture, and there's all these young women who are expressing that they're really fragile and everything makes them anxious and everything makes them depressed. And it's like, I don't understand how the two things are happening at the same time. Like, we're either really strong and capable or we're not. And that's why I think it's a front, because, we've got all of these mental health issues, but then we've got a generation of women saying, I'm like a badass bitch. I don't care. I'll just treat men how they treat me. It's a weird kind of paradox going on.
And never a link drawn between the two things. Like the fact that, I mean, and which is, I think, one of the reasons why the biochemical explanation for mental illness is so attractive, because it doesn't force you to think, oh, actually, maybe there's something wrong with my way that I'm living my life. So you can simultaneously say everything that I'm doing, being a bitch, whatever, like, is great and is good for me, and yada yada. And I also just coincidentally happen to have crippling mental illness. But that's caused by something else.
Yeah, no, I actually think you can use. It's not just feelings of anxiety and depression that they're numbing. It's probably sometimes feelings of guilt and signs from your body that you're not behaving right or treating people right. And now we're just encouraged to numb that or go to therapy and justify it in some way, like link it to your childhood or something. Which, it just becomes a constant cycle.
And it's similar in a sense to the pill, right? In that what the pill does is it disables healthy reproductive functioning in women. I'm not quite as dogmatic on the pill as Mary Harrington is. I actually I use hormonal contraceptions. I think that they are useful. I think the primary thing that hormonal contraception is useful for is birth spacing, because it is bad for you, particularly if you're having C-sections, to have babies really close together. But what the pill does do, like by design, is like disable healthy functioning. And I wonder if to some extent, to the extent to which they work, which as discussed, they don't, but these pills are also to some extent designed to do the same thing. They're designed to numb the feedback on how your life is making you feel.
Yeah, well, even things like social anxiety is a cue. It's telling you, you haven't practiced this enough, or you're not good at this, or there's something about this situation which you need to get more comfortable with. And now we're getting advertised, medication for social anxiety, and it's become like a disorder that can be part of your identity. Whereas I think that's like an important signal to tell you where you need to work on your resilience. And same with other things like if you're feeling anxious, but also if you're feeling lonely, and again, you download a therapy app and chat to a therapist every day, you're not listening to the signal, and the signal is telling you you need to go out and speak to people and face some discomfort. So yeah, that's such a good point about the pill. It's like all of these medications are kind of numbing the normal human experience, which then puts you in a position where you have to pay for more intervention because your signals you've messed them up and you can't read how you're feeling anymore.
And like logging off as well being one of the top top things to maximize your well-being. And that doesn't seem to be, well, no, I obviously see that advised by like sensible mental health content creators, but that's not part of the hot girl pills discourse, right?
Not at all, no. Well, and if anything, it's like, talk to your online community about how you feel. Or like I see so many things like they'll be like, oh, we've created a new app for Gen Z's mental health where you can chat to other people, or you can log how you feel, or you can read like a positive affirmation. There's so many of these apps, like it's like $1 billion market, and it's like, okay, but you're still on your phone. It's like it can be as good as possible, but you're still talking to strangers on a screen. So I don't take any of those companies seriously when the solution is like still be on your phone, or it's like Instagram but for mental health. It's just bullshit. It doesn't work.
Let's talk about body image in relation to social media, because that also is I think a big part of what's feeding into young women in particular being so distressed by looking at screens all day.
Body image, and I would also say facial image. So I don't think older generations realize how much girls and young women obsess over their faces now and look at their faces because they're growing up with cameras on their phones, filters, editing apps. I mean, they are obsessing over their appearance for hours and hours a day and incentivized to do that. And also seeing, obviously, influencers who've edited themselves, who are using TikTok filters that are kind of like undetectable. So not only are you obsessing over your face and body, but you're seeing perfect, unrealistic, virtual avatars of other people and comparing yourself to them. So I often cringe when I hear about unrealistic beauty standards, and they're just, some people will call like being thin an unrealistic beauty standard. Which, that makes me cringe, but I do think, it's impossible now to meet some of the ideals that are getting pushed on us. So if you look at, say, Kim Kardashian, a selfie of hers, she literally looks like an avatar. She doesn't look like a real person, but we're so used to seeing her face that we think it's kind of normal. But if you kind of, even 20 years ago, saw her face, you would be like, that's like a cartoon. And you think of not just the young girls inundated with it, but the young boys and men seeing that all of the time. That is the new beauty ideal, and it's literally impossible without editing apps or cosmetic surgery.
Kim Kardashian's hip waist ratio is insane. I know she says that she hasn't had surgery on her bum. I think she does admit to having surgery elsewhere.
Yeah.
And didn't she have like an X-ray or something on camera to prove that she didn't have like silicone in her bum? But she clearly has had something like it.
Oh,
also because you can also see across time that she's physically changed.
Surely she's had a BBL. Has she admitted to that or no?
She's not admitted to it, no.
Oh God,
she does also do, I shouldn't know this, I can't believe I know this, but she does also do an incredible amount of like weight training.
Yeah.
So I think that she does have like massive strong glutes.
Yeah.
So, you want like someone to rescue you from a burning building, Kim might be able to do it. But clearly the whole thing is one, incredibly expensive, and two, artificial, and three, as you say, like even seeing her in the flesh, she wouldn't quite look like that because so much of it is down to filters and like.
Well, that's the thing about it.
Everything.
Is it actually a lot of the popular cosmetic surgeries among young women actually look better online than they do in real life? So
Yeah.
women are like prioritizing how they look in case someone takes a picture of them or they need to take a selfie, and almost in a way sacrificing how they look in real life for that. So, when you see like Instagram face in real life, it's very jarring. If someone has fillers, you can really notice it.
I sat next to a woman recently at a coffee shop in Soho who I recognized from Instagram. I don't use Instagram very much. I mean, like the podcast is on Instagram because
Yeah.
I'm trying to spread the gospel, but otherwise I don't really use it. But I did know this woman because to the extent I use it is to look at fashion. And so I recognized her, and she looked really strange in real life. Like, she's a very beautiful woman, obviously, but in real life she was like, she doesn't actually look like she's had that many fillers online, but then in person you can immediately tell that she's had fillers, and she's all kind of like a swollen, like she's like a
Yeah.
balloon, like she's all shiny and swollen and like pretty but weird.
Yeah. There's something like in human nature where we can just sense, that's not the proportions of your face.
Yeah.
But
It's got uncanny valley
yeah,
vibes.
yeah.
Instagram face.
But
Yeah.
if you took a really naturally kind of beautiful girl and you took a picture of her next to someone who's had a lot of fillers and cosmetic surgeries, or got the Instagram face, in a photo, it does a disservice to the naturally pretty girl and makes the girl with Instagram face look amazing, because all of those exaggerated features look great on camera. And so it's kind of a weird scenario where young women are choosing to look better online, and even things like BBLs look better on Instagram than they do in real life. They look kind of really disproportionate in real life. Lip fillers look better online. They tend to look stranger when you see them in person. Obviously, some are done well, but all of these women who've kind of gone too far with it, they still look good on their Instagram.
The Spectator got me to write a piece recently about plastic surgery, which meant that I actually went and looked at like plastic surgery TikTok, which I would not normally look at. And it's really interesting how plastic surgery trends make everyone ethnically ambiguous.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's particularly striking with noses, where you have East Asian women often actually having their noses like
I like
made bigger.
mm,
They tend to have smaller noses that they want to make more European. And then say Middle Eastern women want to have their noses straightened if they have a kind of Roman nose. I mean, that's one example of the European ideal being preferable, but it's not always the European ideal that's preferable. It's like you take different, like the sexiest
yeah,
features
and then
of every
yeah,
group and put them in the same figure, which basically looks like Kim Kardashian, who is very
yes,
ethnically ambiguous.
yeah. That's what I was going to say. It is a Kardashian face. But I think what happens is, if it's almost strange if you take if you exaggerate each feature, make each feature perfect. That's when you end up with a strange Instagram face, because you need a bit of imperfection for someone to be kind of naturally beautiful. They do need some flaws, and when you see a face that is like a virtual avatar, I think a lot of people would describe like Kim Kardashian as like sexy or hot, but is she like beautiful or like pretty in a human sense? I think it's a really different like conception of what's attractive.
Yeah, I mean, well, Kim is really like doubling down on the sexy look, I guess, because it makes her money. There was an episode of Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom podcast just recently with a researcher called Tracy Valencourt, just Canadian researcher. I'm going to try really hard to get her on the show because she's so good, and she specializes in female intersexual competition.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
the ways that women are aggressive to one another.
Okay.
And two things I took away from that episode, which stuck in my mind. One, not relevant to the Instagram thing, but very interesting, that on men's sports teams, the most successful player tends to also be the most popular player among teammates, whereas on female sports teams, the opposite tends to be true. Not that the best players are the least popular, but they're very rarely the most popular. There's normally actually, because of because women tend to want to kind of exert more egalitarianism in single sex groups, there's a tendency to kind of tear down the really successful players or the really accomplished individuals or whatever, and so they actually pay a social penalty for being really good at the sport. The other interesting thing I learned was that women also are very down on other women being too sexually provocative in how they dress. So she spoke about doing studies where you'd get like a very beautiful woman to come and interact with the study participants. And in one circumstance, she was dressed modestly, but still very beautiful. And then in another circumstance, she was dressed really sexy and provocatively. The women felt like neutral or positive about her when she was dressed modestly, and felt extremely negatively towards her when she was dressed
Really
provocatively. Yeah, like women slut shame really hard.
Well, I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah,
women do slut shame more.
They
Yeah.
do, and so their regard for a woman who's super provocatively dressed like plummets, which is very interesting when it comes to someone like Kim, because she clearly is like super. That's kind of her thing, to be super
Yeah.
sexy. Didn't she bring out a bra recently which had like nipples like?
I haven't seen it. You know so much about
I know. I don't know how. It's partly from working for the Mail, but it's also just my own shameful preoccupations. She brought out this bra recently, which has like nipples like stuck on, so it basically makes it look under a t-shirt like you're not wearing a bra. But of course you are. So the impression that it gives is that you just have like perkier boobs and you really do, but that you're not wearing a bra, which is kind of clever. But anyway, that's her whole thing, being super, super sexy. And so it's interesting that women don't like hate her more. Why are so many women following her on Instagram, I guess, is the mystery. I don't really know.
Because I've often heard like about other celebrities like Taylor Swift. I've heard people say, oh, people love Taylor Swift because she's like very pretty, she's like beautiful, but she's not kind of like aggressively sexual, and she's kind of not threatening to young women. So Kim Kardashian is kind of the aberration. I don't know why she's had this, and also I don't know why it's her face that's kind of been the replica for Instagram face. I wonder if it's just timing. You know, she was just there when Instagram took off. I don't know, but it's strange.
I guess there's a difference between following someone on Instagram and being friends with them. So I wouldn't be surprised if Kim has problems with like female friendships, because women don't like this sexually provocative stuff. But I guess what do you get from? Why do I look at pictures of Kim? Well, I mean, for research, obviously.
Yeah, no, but she does have like a
there's intrigue. Like something mesmerizing about her. Yeah. Maybe it's, I guess, because it's so aspirational, because you're like, this is what men want. This is what I should aspire to.
Yeah, I also think there's something about you know how perfect she looks, as in how like proportionally perfect and like virtual avatar she looks, that it's almost like we're fascinated by it, we're intrigued by it. But I don't. It sounds kind of weird, but you don't really view her as like human. It's almost like she is an avatar. She is something different. So maybe it's that kind of curiosity.
And there is something very entrancing about looking at someone who's incredibly beautiful, even if you're not sexually interested in them. I mean, like, well, this is maybe a different impulse, but it's like how a beautiful child or a beautiful animal or something, you're like, wow, you just can't kind of take your eyes off them, even though it has nothing to do with sexual desire. Maybe there's that same kind of like magnetic effect.
I think that's why, you know, these kind of platforms are so bad for girls and young women, because, you know, I hear people say, well, girls shouldn't look at stuff like that on Instagram. You know, they shouldn't look at Instagram influencers. They shouldn't look at things that make them feel bad about themselves. But we are drawn to it. You know, we're all drawn to look at like beautiful or like sexually provocative things, anything that kind of catches your attention. And if you look at like a young girl's Instagram, it will just be full of the most like exaggerated kind of pornified influencers and celebrities, because there's something about it that's intriguing. But unfortunately, I do think it's terrible for young girls who scroll through that for like 5 hours a day and then go look in the mirror and see such a contrast.
Advice I once heard from a cosmetic dermatologist who is also like big on YouTube, is don't look at yourself too closely in the mirror. This was her advice to women who were struggling with acne or wrinkles or whatever, because she said no one else looks at you that close. Like don't like do this, with your magnifying mirror and be like, oh, my blemishes, because that's not a realistic standard to hold yourself to. And yet so many, like, that's so normal now to be incredibly minutely critical of your own appearance.
But yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, no one analyzes each individual bit of your face. They just kind of look at your face. Whereas girls now, like if you go on TikTok, it's like, okay, if your lip is this shape, then it could be better. If your nose is slightly like this, or if your eyebrows, they need to be lifted. And it's like very specific adjustments. And it's really sad because there's so many young women who are like uniquely beautiful, they're different in some way. And they're kind of funneling themselves into the same face. You see the same makeup looks over and over again, the same face repeated. And when you see someone who's slightly different, who does have kind of like imperfections, it's almost more striking now because it's like, okay, you don't have that same copy and paste Instagram face.
What do you think is the remedy to this? Because one remedy I've heard proposed, which I suspect you disagree with, but I want to find out,
Okay.
is to be sort of didactically telling girls that this is not healthy, that you should have, say, body image lessons in PHSE at school, to be sort of in the same way that we say that sometimes that this is a response to porn culture, is to say, look, porn isn't realistic, Instagram isn't realistic, just like kind of to tell young people, to let them know. And even to assert as well, like big is beautiful, to sort of assert, no, actually, like you are wrong about what you think is beautiful. Here's what's actually beautiful. This strikes me as futile.
Yes, well, I would firstly say that, young women know it's not real. But a lot of young women know, they can pick up, that's cosmetic surgery, that's an editing app, that's a filter. It doesn't make a difference. It still makes you feel shit because you're like, okay, I still don't look like that. That's still like a way I could look if I put in enough effort or whatever. And it's still a comparison. So you can know someone's edited themselves with an editing app, but you take off your filter and you look at your actual face and you're still disappointed. So I don't think, saying it's not real would help. I think it's literally just about less time on screens, because it's completely normal for girls to, worry about how they look and also to aspire for beauty and to be interested in looking more attractive. We shouldn't be demonizing that. But it's the amount of time. So it's like, okay, I'm sure it's fine for girls to kind of look at a makeup ad and see how they could do their makeup. But it's not fine to be served that for 5 hours a day relentlessly, and the algorithm is making it more extreme each time, and it's personalized to your unique insecurities. So it's like, every adolescent girl is probably going to struggle with insecurity and want to look good. But it's about, when does it get to the point where it's ridiculous, where, she's thinking about her face for 6 hours a day or something. So yeah, I think less about telling girls this is bad and more about just getting girls off their screen and, banning social media if you're, in early puberty and you're in that stage that is just so vulnerable to stuff like that. You should just not be anywhere near Instagram.
The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.